It's been a busy month. The Fed finally went ahead and cut rates like we were expecting them to. A new report came out that shows that wealthy Americans are pretty much carrying the rest of the country. Not sure how well that's going to work out long term. And also, President Trump went ahead and finally signed an executive deal to go ahead and finalize this TikTok situation that we've been waiting on all year. Now, I know these sound like very different stories. It kind of sounds all over the place. Dekimbe, where are we going with this week? But all have different things that are going to be impacting the economy over time. And if you're wondering how does TikTok affect the economy, you should see how much some of these creators are making on a monthly basis from TikTok Shop, from being creators on there, and different things like that. So 3 very different stories that we're going to be going over this week. Kind of wanted to switch it up a little bit and add in some other things that I'm interested in, some things that I've been reading into as well. I know I talked about the TikTok deal on here before, because for not only myself, but for a lot of other business owners out there in this country right now, TikTok is a major source of getting business. So I was excited to see something like this go through this week, but we'll get into all the details later on. So let's get into it. And we'll be back in 3, 2, 1. We gone. Welcome back, family, to another episode of the First Sip Podcast. I'm your host, Dekimbe Smith. And this week, as I sip on my lemon ginger tea, we're going to be breaking down what's been going on in the economy over the past couple of weeks and other highlights in the news. Because if you know me, you know I read a lot in the news. I'm always checking in what's going on. So I can not only be updated, but bring you guys the updates, right? So we can all be informed and kind of talk about what's going on. So like I talked about in the intro, I want to start off by talking about the Fed cutting the rates, because this is something that I talked about on the last episode that we were expecting. And this is something that's been a long time coming, right? This is the first time we've seen a rate cut this year since, Trump has taken office. And this is something that we have been waiting for the entire year. So it was good to see when Jerome Powell came out and announced that they will be cutting the rate by 25 basis points. And we're going to be expected to see another 2 cuts throughout this year. Because like I talked about last time, if you didn't catch the episode, the thing that we're paying attention to going forward throughout the rest of the year is how the job market is going to be shaken up. Because we got those revised numbers that show that we are short by about 900,000 jobs that we thought we created. But like I said, when that revised number came out, that's not where we were at. So the Fed is looking at this and saying, okay, well, we need to go ahead and make sure that the economy doesn't slow down too much. People are able to still hire new employees. And a part of this, like I said, is going to come from cutting the rate. Now, what else comes from these rate cuts? Because that may not affect you at all, right? If you have nothing to do with hiring people, or you don't have any fear right now about losing your job, you're probably sitting back and saying, okay, well, what else is this going to affect Dekimbe? Well, something that I'm looking at anytime I see news about a rate cut or things like that, I'm checking the savings account rate, and I'm also checking my credit card interest rates, because those are 2 things that I've learned over time do get adjusted almost immediately whenever you see some sort of rate adjustment, right? Because these are variable rates. And when you look at, your credit card rate, which on average right now is probably sitting around somewhere between 20%, maybe mid 20%, depending on how good your credit is, right? And how good of a credit product you have. Those are numbers that are going to be affected when the rates get cut, right? So that interest rate might drop down, because when the Fed does cut the rates, that means the cost to borrow money is also going to be cheaper. So that's something that you want to check and say, okay, well, maybe I was paying a whole bunch of interest on a credit card, and now I'm, going to have some sort of relief coming up in the next couple of months. On the other side, the savings rate, right? Once they cut the rate, that also means that they're not going to be giving you as much money to keep your money inside of that savings account. They're going to go ahead and cut that interest rate down. So if you do have a high yield savings account, earlier this year, you might have been sitting at about a 4%. And after this, you might be down to like a 3.6% now at this point in the year, right? 3.7, depending on, the account you have, whether it's strictly like online savings account, or if they have some sort of brick and mortar. I bring up those differences because that's usually where you see a difference in the rate that you'll get from these different types of banks. So like I said, you'll probably see an adjustment in that savings account rate now that federal rate has been cut. So these are things that we're watching, because money is being affected from these decisions that are being made from the Federal Reserve. But also on the other side, talking about money and, how things are being affected. Another report that I was looking at, and I was talking about this too earlier, was the report that came out that showed that the top 10% of Americans right now are making up more than 49% of the total consumer spending in this country. Yes, you heard me correctly. The top 10% are making up close to half, right? Pretty much half of all consumer spending in this country. So that doesn't sound like a good situation. What if they stop spending? Does that mean we're probably going to be in a recession? Probably, right? Because when you look at that, they really are, like I said in the beginning, they are They got the whole team on their back, and they saying, hey guys, don't worry, we're going to keep spending, and all the shops and all the online retailers, we're going to make sure that these profits stay up, so it looks like everything is good, right? But now what happens if things start affecting them, right? Like we just talked about the job market, we talked about cutbacks from different employers. What happens if these cutbacks start affecting the top 10% of earners, right? And when we're talking about the top 10%, the top 20%, these are households, I believe, that they said were making over $175,000 a year, right? And they were, like I said, contributing to the majority of the spending in this country. The people under, the lower 80% of that, they are just getting by. And not only are they just getting by, their income is also just getting by, right? They haven't seen the type of increases like that top 20 and 10% have coming out of the pandemic over these past couple of years. So, like I said, when I'm looking at these numbers, I'm saying, okay, well, the biggest red flag that goes off to me is saying, okay, well, what happens if something bigger happens in the economy, right? What if we have a stock market pullback like we saw, earlier the year, where people started panicking? Like, will that, kind of make people hold on to their pocket, to their pockets a little bit tighter and say, well, let's get a little bit more strict with this budget and start really tracking things, because we don't know, what's going to happen here. We thought things were going good, but look at what's going on now with the stock market, right? Or look at what's going on now with the housing market. What we have to make smarter decisions. Or, look, we saw 3 friends who just lost their jobs, right? So now we have to consider what happens if we lose our job. Let's not, maybe plan that next vacation, or let's not do the Black Friday shopping. These are all things, like I said, that if that top 10% really pull back and say, okay, we're not going to do it anymore, we're not going to be in a good place, because the middle income and lower income Americans, they've already pulled back and said, we're not going to be doing these things. So, like I said, what happens if we do get to that uneasy point, like the Fed is afraid of, where those people stop spending and start, holding back? So that's another thing I'm going to be looking at over time too, right? Because obviously, when you're looking at spending habits, that's going to be connected to how people are able to afford, housing and those different things that are really close to what I do in my work, being a real estate agent. So these are always things I'm considering. I'm like, okay, well, home prices continue to go up through the roof. Middle and lower income isn't going anywhere, but the top 10% continue to make more and more money. So what is this going to mean long term, right? Are people going to be forced to continue to rent long term? Or is the opportunity for buyers going to open up anytime soon in the future if spending is still so tight? I know it sounds like a lot, but this is what goes through my head when I see things like that. So I'm considering, okay, like, where are people going to be, able to make up the money to kind of close that gap that continues to grow? And one way that people are doing it is through the obvious side hustle. I know we've talked about that before, things, that people might be doing. Like I've done, Uber driving, people might be doing DoorDash. They might have a hobby that they're doing online. They might have an idea that they just monetized. I was talking to a friend the other day, who started something, and, it's starting to catch some wind. They're like, okay, how can I professionalize this, really get the name going? How can I get the business account set up? And I was like, okay, check this out, check that out. Because like I said, these are things that you can really start making not only a couple extra $100, couple $1,000s a month from, if you can really organize an idea that you have and find a way to put it out there in the world, and, just get people to take part in it. And like I said, it's a great way to supplement the income that you're already making in a tight time. And I bring all this up because one way that a lot of people are also supplementing their income is through TikTok. And if you're like me, you probably use TikTok regularly. But in this past year alone, I've definitely used it a lot more, specifically for business. Now, when it comes to my lead generation for my work, TikTok is my number one source. I get leads through there every day now, and not saying everything's qualified, and it's a great lead, but I get a lot of leads through there, and it doesn't even compare to other sources that I've used before. And when I see other people who are on there, who might be doing things like the TikTok live, or might be doing like TikTok shop, these people are running up hundreds of thousands of dollars a month by just recommending products that they're already using. Right. And if you listen to people like Gary Vee, he's a big believer in things like that. We're going to see more and more live shopping. And like I said, people recommending things like, oh, if you like drinking coffee, you should grab one of these mugs. Mugs coming soon. So if you do want to grab a mug, just keep an eye out for the link. But, these are things, like I said, people are putting out there online. They're formalizing their ideas and making money from it. So when I saw Trump go ahead and finally, do executive action behind this TikTok deal to finalize it, I was like, okay, great. We're finally making some progress behind this, because a lot of people are worrying, and trying to figure out, okay, do I need to start getting, offloading the people my community off of this platform? Do I need to start collecting emails, phone numbers, so I can continue to communicate with them if this goes down? Now it looks like we might have a bright future ahead.
The company will be valued around $14 billion. We actually think this is a good deal for investors, but ultimately the investors are going to make the determination about what they want to invest in and what they think is a proper value. The most important thing is that it does protect Americans' data security. It ensures TikTok is still accessible. And on this question of the algorithm, which we've heard this a lot, what this deal ensures is that the American entity and the American investors will actually control the algorithm.
Looks like they were able to bring on some of the original investors that were supposed to buy it back when Trump was first pushing this deal back in 2020. And, that's going to be a combination of the head of Oracle, so Larry Ellison, who was just recently the richest man in the world for about a day or two. He like I said, he's the head of Oracle, which is a cloud computing service. And they've actually been running, and in charge of TikTok's US data, right? So it hasn't been over there in China, like a lot of people might think. It's actually been right here, and they're housing all that information. But what they want to do completely with this deal is have it, basically be not completely divested from Chinese control, because when I was looking at the deal, ByteDance will still control about 20% of TikTok, right? And then the rest of it will be made up between, and it hasn't been finalized yet, but between the head of Oracle and potentially between some of the heads of Fox, right? So the Murdochs, Rupert Murdoch and his son as well. Now, this is something I also like, kind of a side tangent. When you look at how people, once you get to a certain level of wealth, really start to expand their asset pool and go into other things like media, right? We've seen this play before with people like Elon Musk, where he made his acquisition of Twitter and changed it over to X. Now you see people like I said, Larry Ellison. His son also went ahead and is now in charge of Paramount and all the assets that they control. So when you look at how people really start spreading out, and really just kind of like opening up their umbrella more and more and more into what they're doing, that's something I'm also like super interested in. I love to kind of read into those stories. So this was another cool one for me to dive into. And that's why I wanted to bring it to you guys and also see, is this stuff that you pay attention to? What do you think about, this kind of TikTok deal? Do you think this is good? Do you think America is being completely sidetracked by things like TikTok? Let me know, because I do also have side views on that as well, thinking that this, TikTok is also a big distraction, but so is Instagram for a lot of people if you're not using these things correctly. But now, like they said, now that's going to be in US control for the first time. Is this going to be something that's going to be good? Are they going to be able to put a positive spin on it? I was also reading that some people were afraid that they might magify TikTok if, people like Larry Ellison and the Murdochs get in charge of it. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the algorithm is pretty damn good the way it is, and I think they're going to keep it that way. But who knows? We'll see, right? We have to wait and see what happens. But as always, I'm going to keep bringing you guys the news, keep you tuned into what's going on. Before I end it, I got a content recommendation for you guys this week. And this one's on Netflix, but it's actually an older show that they just put on there, I guess, within the last 2 months. And it's a UK-based show called The Lazarus Project. And this one, if you haven't heard about it, is basically about this multinational group that comes together to basically stop world-ending events. And how do they do this? They do this by going back in time. Now, they figured out a way to do this because they found some sort of weird singularity in space that is like, one of those things that cuts through the fabric of time, right? Something that none of us know nothing about. So maybe if I bring on an astrophysicist sometime in the future, they can try to make that make sense. I don't know what it is really that they figured out, but what I do know is they figured out a way to go back in time. And they found out that they can go back at July 1st every year to go back and reverse whatever it is that needs to happen so the world doesn't end. Now, of course, that sounds, like a cool plot, but things start to go wrong. People start to die as they go on these missions, and then some people say, hey, let's just go back in time and bring them back. But other people on the team say, hey, we have this rule that says that's not allowed. If somebody dies, they die. You can't go. So what happens now when somebody doesn't want to follow the rules? All hell breaks loose. And that's where I'm going to leave it because I don't want to tell you guys too much. But trust me, definitely check it out. It's on Netflix. It's called The Lazarus Project. And like I said, I'm going to keep bringing you guys new information, keep bringing you guys the news, keep you informed on what's going on so we can all keep sharing in good debates and good conversations and hope that the world doesn't burn down before we're all able to get to a great place of financial freedom and happiness. So until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and as always, enjoy your first sip.